That sunny afternoon, Pastor Kenneth could not believe what he had just heard. He was sweating profusely as he kept pacing around his office. What have I done to myself? Oh my God, this cannot be possible. I can't let this ruin my effort so far. No, I can't. I really have to do something very fast. In a very busy city called Abadan was the headquarters of Operation Fire for Fire Ministries. It was a well-known church all over the country, and it was rumored that there was no kind of miracle that the pastor could not perform. Pastor Kenneth was a well-known pastor, and people came from far and near just to see him. Sick people could even fly from overseas just for Pastor Kenneth to pray for them. His church was always flowing with thousands of members almost every Sunday, and even prominent men of the society attended his church. But what people could not understand was the secret behind Pastor Kenneth's family. He was already of age, but yet no one had ever seen him with a wife or a child. Some rumored that he divorced his wife, while others said that his family abandoned him when he was nothing, but no one actually knew the truth behind his family. In the same city of Abadan lived a very rich politician called Chief Bayo and his family. Chief Bayo was married to 6 wives, but he had a favorite daughter named Grace. She was the second child of his 4th wife, popularly known as Madam Lizzie. Grace was a very calm, intelligent young lady, and whatever she needed in this life, her father was ready to provide it to her. Chief Bayo's entire family were all churchgoers, but none of them were really Christians. They all attended Pastor Kenneth's ministry, but they weren't serious with the things of God. At the age of 16, Grace was exceptional from the rest of the family members. She was so devoted to church activities that she decided to join the church choir. She had a very melodious voice that whenever she wanted to sing, the whole church would become calm just to hear her voice. Aside from this, Grace was a very young, beautiful girl and had a very nice shape that made any guy that sets his eyes on her to begin to run after her. Even at school, a lot of boys usually fought for her attention, including male teachers, but she would just reply them, telling them that her pastor said having a boyfriend at that age was a sin before God. Among these guys that were running after her was a young charming guy called Tony. He was the cutest guy in the school and every girl's dream. A lot of girls fought among themselves for his attention, but it seems like it was only Grace that didn't fancy anything about him. Tony had tried everything in his power to make Grace fall for him, all to no avail. She was so rooted in church activities that entering a relationship at that age was the last thing on her mind. She would always turn any of her encounter with Tony to preach for him and always trying to convert him to become a Christian. One day, Tony, being frustrated after all his effort to win her heart, said to her, "Be there behaving like the most holy person. When it will hit you, you will not know." And before Grace could ask him any questions, he had already walked away. Grace was confused on what Tony just said, but she just faded it away, telling herself that it was just one of the useless talks from frustrated boys whenever she declines their proposal. Even her fellow girls had told her severally that she needed to loosen up a bit in church and religious things. They would sometimes ask her if she was the only person that wanted to make it to heaven, but she would always reply them saying, "My pastor said that if I was the only person that finally made it to heaven, God will be happy. You and this your pastor say, oh, your pastor said this, your pastor said that. Leave your pastor alone now. Allow the man to breathe." They would always tell her and walk away. One day, while Grace was singing on the altar, her melodious voice caught the attention of the pastor. Pastor Kenneth sent one of his staff to tell Grace to meet him in his office after service. Pastor Kenneth was also captivated by her beauty that he concluded in himself that he needed to make Grace to be close to him. Grace was so happy when she heard that the general overseer of her church was inviting her to his office. She could barely wait for the service to end that day. Immediately church service ended, she quickly rushed to Pastor Kenneth's office. He seemed happy when he saw her walk into his office and he offered her a seat. Grace was confused and curious to know why her pastor would invite her to his office, but the silence was broken when he asked her what was her name. "Sir, my name is Grace." Wow, what a nice name. And it seems like the grace of God is upon you. He said, laughing. I was so amazed by your melodious voice in church service today. We thank God, sir, she said, replying him. Yes, so do your parents know that you have such a wonderful voice? I don't think so. They barely notice anything about me. They are always busy with their work. Oh, that's bad. Don't worry, always feel free to come and meet me like your father for support. My door is always open for you. How would you like to become the head of my choir? Grace was excited, but became sad when she remembered that the choir already had a head. She then declined, telling Pastor Kenneth that the choir already had a leader, but Pastor Kenneth laughed and told her that he knew how he would handle it. Grace then thanked him and left the office. Pastor Kenneth kept on smiling and said to himself, at least this will bring us close together. When Grace went home and told her parents excitedly what happened, they replied nonchalantly as they were busy with their work. Grace then walked to her room feeling disappointed that even her mother didn't show any interest in what she was saying. The next day, when Grace went to school, she narrated all that had happened the previous day to her best friend Linda. But Linda didn't seem so excited as she expected her to be. Linda kept on wondering what her pastor saw in Grace that would make him take someone's existing position and hand it over to her. Linda began to feel that he had another motive. When Grace noticed her friend's mood, she asked what the problem was, but Linda just said that she was fine. But Grace insisted, and Linda told her that she didn't feel comfortable with the whole situation. She asked her what would make a pastor to just favor her like that. She said that she felt something was awkward. But Grace became angry and signed, telling Linda that she was just jealous. But Linda apologized, saying that she just felt something was amiss. Grace then told her that she should keep her opinions to herself and walked away. As time went on, the news of the priest changing of the choir leader was a shocking news to the congregation. Those who knew the former choir leader knew that she was a very good person in performing her duties. So they still could not figure out why her position was taken and given to a small teenage girl. But no one could confront the decision of the priest because they felt that whatever reason that would make the priest remove the old choir leader would actually be the best. On the other hand, Grace never made them to regret her. She always put in all her effort and abilities to perform her duties as expected as a choir leader. She came up with fantastic new ideas that could help in the growth of the church, and it wasn't long before she became popular in the church. As time went on, Grace started noticing some strange occurrences in the church. She could not understand why the previous choir leader never came to the church again since the day that she was impeached. She felt that probably she was jealous and couldn't face the sight of the new leader, but something inside Grace kept telling her that there was something more than this. One sunny afternoon, Grace walked up to Pastor Kenneth's office and was about opening the door when she began to hear a female voice shouting from inside the office. She was confused and she could not understand what would give anyone the audacity to shout at their well-known pastor like that, not to even talk of a woman. Grace remained behind the door, trying to listen to their conversation, when the door flung open and an angry lady dressed like a harlot left the office. Grace was confused. She didn't know what to do at that moment. She just quickly went into the office and dropped the file and wanted to go out. When Pastor Kenneth called her back in a polite voice, "Grace, whatever you have heard or saw today must not be known by anyone except us. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," she said as she left the office. When she got home that day, she became very confused. She still tried to picture everything that had happened earlier, but she couldn't picture out anything reasonable. To make matters worse, she began to receive frightening messages and emails on her phone. Messages like "be careful" and other messages like "don't fall for the trap" from unknown senders. Grace still couldn't picture out the point where all these messages were coming from. She decided to inform her mother, but her mother seemed not to be much concerned because she was busy with her work activities. The only thing she told Grace was to ignore them. Grace just felt disappointed but decided to follow her mother's advice and ignore them. One fateful day, Grace was depressed because her parents had a quarrel and her father sent her mother packing. Her mother didn't hesitate and moved to one of her big mansions in town. Grace tried to stop her mother from going, but she refused, saying that she couldn't take it any longer. Grace then told her that she would remain in her father's house and that she wasn't going anywhere. Her mother just signed and took her siblings and left the house. Even though her father provided all she needed, Grace still felt depressed because staying with her stepmothers never really felt like home. That evening, frustrated with depression, Grace decided that she needed counseling from her pastor. She walked down to her pastor's office that evening and surprisingly he was around. He became worried when he saw her face looking sad and asked her what the problem was. And she began to explain all that had been going on in her family lately. Pastor Kenneth began to feel sorry for her. He began to comfort her, telling her that things would be alright. She thanked him and was about to go when he called her back and told her that he would be celebrating his birthday that weekend. Grace became very happy and congratulated him in advance. He then told her that he would be hosting a birthday party in his house that weekend and was inviting her to come. Grace became excited and accepted. She saw this as an opportunity to clear her head from the depression she was passing through. She thanked him again and left the office. Pastor Kenneth just kept on smiling and biting his lips as she left. When Grace told Linda about the invitation to the birthday party, Linda became worried and asked if she could go with her. But Grace refused, saying that it wasn't proper to go to a place uninvited. Linda said that she knew that it wasn't the right thing to do, but she was just scared that something bad might happen to Grace, and this made Grace flare up in anger. "Why are you always like this, Linda? You never see anything good in all I do. Why are you just so jealous of me?" Linda just looked at Grace in shock, but said that she just wanted them to be careful. But Grace told her that she should keep her care to herself and walked away. The D-Day for the birthday party finally came and Grace was dressed in one of her best clothes. But what Grace didn't understand is why her pastor decided to fix his birthday party at night, and it seems like nobody in the church knew that it was his birthday because it was never announced in any church service. Grace just faded all these thoughts aside and boarded a taxi to Pastor Kenneth's house. When she got to his house, she was so surprised with how big and beautiful his mansion was. Even though her father was very rich and well connected, she had still never seen any house as beautiful as that. When she walked into the compound, everywhere seemed busy with strong faces that she had never noticed in any church service before. They began to stare at her like if she was odd, and this made her notice that she was the only one wearing a decent dress. She felt weird but took up courage and knocked at the door of the mansion. The door flung open and she quietly walked in. Everywhere seemed like a club and there was no sign of a cake as in a birthday party. Grace hadn't seen any sight of Pastor Kenneth, so she took up courage and asked a woman who seemed to laugh on hearing the name Pastor. The only thing the woman said was, "Are you his new one?" Grace didn't understand what she meant by that, but before she could question any further, Pastor Kenneth was already walking towards her, calling her name. Grace felt relieved on seeing her pastor, but she didn't understand why he was dressing that way and holding a glass of alcohol. She became uncomfortable, but Pastor Kenneth told her to relax and that there was nothing to be worried about. He took her aside and gave her a soft drink which he had kept for her. Grace felt like rejecting it, but because it was a birthday party as she assumed, she didn't want Pastor Kenneth to feel bad, so she thanked him and drank the soft drink. Pastor Kenneth just smiled and engaged her in a discussion, and it wasn't long before Grace began to feel dizzy. Grace felt that she would be able to manage it, but before she knew what was happening, she had already fallen deeply asleep. Pastor Kenneth smiled hard, licking his lips, and took her to his room. This was what he had always been waiting for. He had always admired her nice shape and had been trying different ways to get the teenage girl to his bed. That night, Pastor Kenneth slept with Grace. When Grace woke up, she was so surprised to see herself in a room that was not her room. She couldn't believe her eyes when she saw her pastor in the same bed with her. She became confused on what's really happened. How did she get there? What is she doing there? As all these questions began running through her mind, the only thing she could remember was the drink pastor gave to her. She just screamed on realizing what had just happened. When Pastor Kenneth woke up, he met Grace crying bitterly beside him, and the only thing he could ask her was, "How was your night?" "Pastor, I actually trusted you. I have always taken every single word you say as a guide in my heart. I have gone around telling people about you. How could you do this to me? How could you?" she said, breaking down in tears. "Oh, please, spare me with all this trash. You were always the one coming around me. So what do you expect me to do then? Do I look like a log of wood to you? Now listen to me. Whatever happened here must not be known by anyone. You must not say or do anything that will spoil my reputation, or guess what? I will personally kill you," he said, walking out of the room. "You are a demon," she kept on crying bitterly. She began to feel bitter within herself, saying that she had been a fool all this while. She kept on cursing the pastor, blaming herself for falling into his dirty traps, even when the signs were clear for her to have seen earlier. When she got home that morning, no one asked her where she had been all night, including her father. He was just busy with his work activities. Grace just walked straight into her room and shut the door. She still could not believe what had just happened to her. She couldn't believe that her pastor she had trusted so much with all her heart could have such evil motive against her. She kept on weeping uncontrollably, breaking her things and blaming herself for being such a fool all this while. When she got to school the next day, her eyes were swollen. Linda kept on asking her what the problem was, but the only thing she kept on replying was that she was fine, but she was just stressed out. She didn't want to open up to anybody because her pastor had earlier threatened to kill her if she does. Linda felt uncomfortable by the reply, but just decided to accept it like that. Grace became a shadow of herself. She was always putting on a sad face. She hardly smiled nor talked to anybody, and she always stayed on her own. She became very dull in her academics and never answered questions in class as she normally used to. Some teachers noticed her new development, but whenever they asked her what the problem was, she would always tell them that she was okay and that she just had a little headache. One sunny afternoon, while other students were playing happily that break period, Linda saw Grace sitting alone under a tree crying. Linda decided to walk up to her, but on getting to where Grace was seated, she noticed Grace immediately ran into a little bush to vomit. Linda quickly ran up to her and decided to take her to the school clinic for them to take some medication. But the doctor insisted that they run a test. When the test results came out, Linda came out with the results in her hand, and the only thing she asked Grace was, "What happened to you?" Grace was confused, but before she could grab the results from Linda's hand, the doctor just said, "Grace, you are pregnant." "What? No, doctor, this cannot be true," she said as she took the results and bursted into tears. Linda and the doctor kept trying to make her calm, but Grace just ran out of the school clinic, heading towards the school gate. Linda immediately ran to her and stopped her from going out. She calmed her down and took her to one of the empty classrooms in the school. She kept on begging Grace to open up to her, saying that she wouldn't know how to help her unless she knew what really happened. Grace just kept on crying bitterly as she whispered that it was her pastor. Linda was indeed very confused, but Grace explained all that had happened that night to Linda. Linda just sighed deeply. She knew that she had earlier warned Grace, but she never listened to her. She was so blinded with her trust for her pastor that she didn't see the danger coming. Grace just kept on crying as she began to apologize to Linda for not taking her advice earlier. But Linda kept on telling Grace that it was okay, and all they needed to do now was to find a way forward. She then suggested to Grace that they should inform her father, but Grace refused, saying that she didn't want to face any form of disgrace. She then made Linda to swear and promise that she wouldn't tell anyone. Linda felt uncomfortable, but she just made the promise. That same day, after school, Grace walked up to Pastor Kenneth's office and actually met another lady on his laps. She just angrily pushed all his stuffs on the table to the ground. The lady fearfully ran out of the office. Pastor Kenneth ran mad with anger, and before he could do anything, Grace told him that she was pregnant as she dropped the test result on his table. He looked very shocked and fearfully picked up the result. He then laughed and said, "So how do I know that I am the one who is responsible for your baby when you know that you are a harlot?" Grace was surprised by what Pastor Kenneth just said. This was the same man that she had trusted with all her heart, and after defiling her, he had the guts to deny her. "You evil monster, I trusted you. How could you do such a thing to me?" Pastor Kenneth just laughed and told her that she should go and find the father of her baby, and that he wasn't ready to father any child. Grace felt heartbroken. She angrily slapped him and walked out of the office. She blamed herself for being stupid all this while. Everything now made sense to her. Why he made her a choir leader, the day the lady angrily walked out of his office, and why no one knew about his family. She kept on crying as she wondered about what people would say when they hear that the girl that had always been practicing holiness was now pregnant for her own pastor. Meanwhile, Pastor Kenneth kept on sweating profusely in his office. He kept on pacing around, thinking on what to do. He told himself that he wasn't ready to allow a little girl spoil his reputation and dignity that he had been building for years. He kept on telling himself that he really needed to do something very fast. Immediately Grace walked into her house, she noticed that the living room was tensed. Her mother, who had earlier packed out of the house, was around, and she was surprised when she saw her friend Linda. She was surprised when she saw Linda, and all her stepmothers and her siblings were all present. She greeted her father, but he didn't answer. And as she was about walking into her room, her father just looked up and asked in an angry tone, "Who got you pregnant?" Grace was surprised on hearing that question. She couldn't believe that her best friend would betray her and break her promise. But she pretended not to know what her father was talking about. But her father insisted, saying, "The school clinic authorities had already informed us, so don't even try lying to us. Do you want to bring shame to my name after all I have done for you? Is this how you want to repay me? Who is that stupid boy? Answer me now." But Grace just kept on crying and remained silent. Her mother then started shouting and blaming her husband for not being a father that could be able to watch over his daughter, saying that just a few weeks she left, their daughter became pregnant. Her father became angry and started shouting and quarreling with his, saying that she hadn't been a good mother for leaving her daughter and moving out. Grace just screamed, blaming her parents for never being there for her, always busy with their works and never wanted to know how she felt, not giving her the love and attention she needed as a daughter. And now they are blaming her for bringing shame to their name. She kept on asking them where were they when all these things were happening to her, and she needed someone to guide her. She kept on crying as she ran towards her room. Her parents began to feel remorseful as they actually knew that they had never been good parents to their daughter. They walked up to her room and tried talking to her, but Grace refused to open the door. The only thing she kept on saying was, "Pastor Kenneth, why would you do such a thing to me?" Her father, Chief Bayo, was confused, and he just picked up his phone and ordered that Pastor Kenneth should be arrested. The news began to go viral that the well-known powerful pastor, Kenneth, was now arrested for impregnating a little girl of 16 years old. People could not believe their ears. The case even became worse when other ladies that the pastor had impregnated began to have the boldness to speak out, including the former choir leader. It was said that he had different wives and children that were living outside the country. A lot of people were disappointed that the pastor that they trust so much would be involved in those kind of things. Pastor Kenneth could not bear the shame and disgrace. He blamed himself for ever having anything to do with the daughter of a rich man, forgetting that she wasn't like other girls that he could oppress. He was sent to life imprisonment for taking advantage of young girls in his church. Linda was happy and ran to give the good news to Grace, but she met Grace still crying bitterly in her room. She kept on blaming herself, telling herself that she could have avoided what happened if only she had been clever enough. A lot of people now mocked and embarrassed her in school, especially some of those people she had rejected earlier on, saying that she was a Christian. Anywhere she now passed, people now formed small group, especially students, gossiping and mocking her. She could now barely walk on the road because of the embarrassment she faced. Even along her street, her name had now become a headline on newspaper and magazines, and now all over the internet. Grace told her father one morning that she won't go to school anymore because she couldn't bear the shame any longer. Some people kept on advising her to abort the baby, but Linda kept on advising her not to do so. One night, after a period of 9 months, labor started, and immediately Linda and few people rushed her to the hospital. But immediately Grace gave birth, no one knew how Grace left the hospital with her baby. As she kept looking at the baby, it kept making her to remember all the trauma she had been through and the situation surrounding his birth. She then named him Mmejọ, which means mistake in the Igbo tradition. She quickly wrapped him in a white blanket and dropped him in front of a motherless baby home. Then she knocked on the gate and left. When Grace returned to the hospital, everyone kept on asking her different questions, and Linda noticed that the baby was missing. She then asked Grace what happened to the baby, and the only thing Grace said was, "It's not mine, so I've returned it." Linda immediately understood what she meant and hugged her tightly in tears, telling her not to worry and that they will pass through that phase of life. 16 years later, Grace's father had initially sent Grace out of the country to continue her education immediately she gave birth to her baby. She now grew up to be a successful lawyer with the aim of fighting for the young girls who had been abused and unable to speak for themselves. But Grace never believed in church again. She felt that they were all a bunch of scammers and no amount of preaching or persuasion could ever make her go to church or anything related to church activities. Her past experience was still hurting her hard, and she hated anything that had to relate with a man of God. Linda had tried all she could to make Grace follow her to church, all to no avail. She had told Grace severally not to allow her past to have a better part of her, but Grace never listened. She felt like all men of God were fake due to how Pastor Kenneth, a man she had trusted with her whole heart, betrayed her. Grace concluded in her mind that there was no God and all those men of God were all scammers. One day, Linda's church were having a special program and she really wanted Grace to attend because she knew that it will help her heal from the wound of the past. She kept trying different ways to invite Grace for the program, but Grace told her that she would never step her feet in a church again. Linda then told Grace that even if she would never attend a church again after that day, that she should just attend the program because of her. Because it was a special day for her, and coincidentally it was Linda's birthday. Grace, after much consideration, decided to go to the program. The program day arrived and Grace just blocked her ears with headphones and walked into the church with Linda. But Grace became very shocked and her mouth fell open in surprise as she noticed the powerful pastor on the altar was the same Tony she knew back then in school. The same boy that she had tried converting to Christianity, but he had always refused. Linda kept on asking her what the problem was, but Grace didn't answer her. She just sat down quietly and listened to the rest of the preaching. At the end of the sermon, Grace began to cry. People around her became confused because it was not a heart-touching sermon. Yet, why was she crying? Immediately the program came to an end. Grace ran out of the church and met Bishop Tony, surrounded with hefty bodyguards, and about to enter his car heading home. Bishop Tony heard someone shouting his name from behind, but he couldn't remember the last time somebody called his name without adding Bishop attached to it, and something about that voice sounded familiar. He immediately turned, and to his greatest surprise, he saw Grace running towards him. He couldn't believe his eyes. She now looked so different than he used to know her. She no longer had that smiling face he had always admired about her. People around were so surprised about the scene. Bishop Tony's wife became uncomfortable and surprised with what was going on. She immediately came out of the car and asked Bishop Tony who Grace was, but he just told her to relax and that he will explain to her later. He then told Grace to follow him to his office. Grace could not stop crying as she narrated all that she had been through to Tony. She then told him that maybe his last statement to her actually came to pass, but Bishop Tony told her not to take any of his words in the past seriously. He then told her that the reason he even changed from his old ways back then was because he admired the way she packaged herself. Despite the pressures coming from people, there was always joy displayed on her face, and he told himself that he needed that kind of life. Grace kept on crying as she just kept on wondering how someone would change because of her. Yet depression was really eating her up. Bishop Tony just smiled and began to console her, telling her to leave the past behind her. But Grace kept on crying, saying that she had been a terrible mother for abandoning her child at a very tender age. But Bishop Tony just told her not to blame herself because she did it out of pain and frustration. He then assured her that someday she would meet her son. Little by little, Grace returned back to her old self again. She began to put on a smile on her face and also started attending church activities. She then started up an NGO that would fight for the rights of young girls who are being abused but can't find their voice, and also help them to heal from every emotional trauma. Things became fine and well for Grace, but there was still a hole in her heart that had not been filled. She would wake up early in the morning and look towards the sky, thinking of what her son would be thinking about her for abandoning him at a very tender age. How would she explain to him the situation surrounding his birth? She would just keep staring at the sky with high hopes of surely meeting her son one day. The end. Please, parents should try and be close to their children so that you can know any emotional trauma they are going through. I'm sure that there is someone in this same condition like Grace. This can be a message of motivation and hope. Please share massively. Do you think that Grace was right by abandoning her newborn baby on the street? Drop your answer in the comment section below. I know you love this story. Please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And don't forget to share to your friends. This might be a message of hope to someone. Don't forget to share. See you in our next story. Goodbye for now. Merry Christmas, everyone.